Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the CAQH Core and X12 webinar. We're really excited to share this third installment with you all, which is a conversation on the 835 transaction standard and operating rules. Some logistics before we get started with our presentation. The slides are available for download in the handout section of the GoToWebinar menu. You can also download the slides and recording on our website after the webinar. Additionally, a copy of the slides and the webinar recording will be emailed to all attendees and registrants in the next 1 to 2 business days. If you download the slides now, you can follow along with us in the webinar, but also please note that there is an appendix at the end of our slide deck, which includes some slides from previous webinars and some additional resources that might be useful to you and your organization. Finally, you can ask questions at any time using the questions panel on the GoToWebinar dashboard to the right of your screen as well. And we'll be addressing those questions during our questions and answers period at the end of the session. So briefly, today we'll start off with an introduction to the 835 transaction, and we've structured today's session to be a conversation between our 2 speakers, Pat and Bob, and we've organized it around frequently asked questions and key themes. So we really want to hear your feedback and questions along the way. And of course, there's going to be a question and answer period at the very end. So any questions that we don't address throughout the session, we will get to at the end. So I want to thank Pat and Bob, who we all know, and they're fantastic speakers, and we're really happy to have them here today. And I will pass it over to Bob for an overview of CAQH Core.
Great, thank you, Daphne. Just as Daphne mentioned, we do want to do a quick introductions on who we are and what we do, and then really get into the meat of the questions. So again, CAQH Core is a mission-driven organization. We really do take this to heart. We bring the industry together to work on things that have caused lots of friction between providers and health plans, and usually in the realm of the administrative transactions. And if there's anything that causes friction, it is payment and understanding the payments that a health plan has for a provider. Lots of questions, lots of issues. But there's ways of making it better. And so we have coordinated with X12 and with all of our participants really in finding the better ways of doing that by developing operating rules based on the standard to bring those efficiencies and automation to the provider office. We work directly with our board, which includes both provider organizations and health plan organizations, as well as the SDOs. So X12, HL7, NACHA, NCPDP, they're all part of our board. They help us understand not only their development process for standards, but also where there might be gaps, where operating rules can fit in to fill those gaps and those challenges that providers continue to have. As you all know, standards are great. That's what makes everything more efficient and what makes everything automated. But sometimes drinking from our fire hose is just that, it's drinking from our fire hose. And so how can we work together as an industry to bring the needs of the provider forefront and ensure that the providers get what they need? Part of that is through our work that we do, as well as the work that WEDI does, for example, or X12 does. NACHA and HL7 fall into these categories too for industry education. We hope to facilitate that. So again, I want to thank Pat for joining us this afternoon for our joint education event. If we go to the next slide, we'll just have another quick intro topic. We have developed operating rules for many of the HIPAA transactions. You see here the entire tableau of operating rules that we have developed. We're going to focus today strictly on the 835 and make sure that we all understand those exact operating rules, what they are, and how they play and interplay with the standard itself. So on to the next slide. With that, I'll hand the call over to Pat for a quick rundown on the 835 transaction. Pat?
Thank you, Bob. I apologize. My voice is not very good today. I've been fighting a cold. So bear with me as we get through this. Next slide. And you can go ahead one more, please. Okay, so X12 Mission, just a little bit background for anyone who's not thoroughly familiar with X12. I apologize, sorry, I'm going to be breaking here. So X12 is an ANSI-accredited, consensus-based nonprofit organization focusing on the development, implementation, and ongoing use of interoperable electronic data interchange standards. That's a lot, it's a mouthful. Basically, we are the developers of the HIPAA transactions, and of course that includes our beloved 835. Next slide. X12 Background, I'd like to just point out that the membership includes experts in more than healthcare, and I'm sure most of you on the call today are involved in healthcare because that's what the 835 is involved around. But we also support transportation, finance, the supply chain, and that's just a few examples. A few others are listed here. X12 has been around for over 40 years. We have a long history in this industry and building the standards. Next slide, please. These are some of X12 goals. You can see them. I'm not going to read them all right now, but you know, it's a lot of collaboration. Our vision and insight is to continuing to move forward as well as the industry evolves. Next slide. So why do we need standards in our industry? I think we've all learned that EDI transactions are the key to successful communication. Codification of the messages along with the standard syntax and data content increases the efficacy across our industry. And that's really what it means to support standards. Next slide. So why do we, what's the benefit of the 835? And I know we've talked about this in some of our other sessions. By the way, those sessions can be found. There's a link to one of them right here on this slide. I did note that we missed the second webinar, and I'm sure that we can probably make sure that's published, either republishing these slides or just making sure that's out there for everyone to access. The 835 replaces paper so that providers can auto-post the payment detail. And that's really the key focus and why the whole purpose of why we have this transaction for automation. Auto-posting to the AR, removes the manual labor and inaccuracies from using paper and increases the turnaround time of the claim life cycle. That's really the bottom line, automation. There's probably more opportunity for us to expand on some of the sessions also. And maybe as a result of today's questions and feedback, we may find that additional opportunity. Next slide.
All right. Thank you both for the overview and introduction here. And now, so I'm actually going to include the link to the second webinar in the chat, just for those on the call to have that in their arsenal. So we're just going to dive straight into our questions here, Pat. Starting off with, what is the new RAZ segment? Tell us a little bit about what it does and when it will be effective.
Okay, great. Thanks, Daphne. So in one of the last sessions I presented, we talked a little bit about, I think, some of the future changes. And one of them is called the RAZ segment, RAS. It will replace the CAZ segment, which is CAS. It was originally added in version 6020, and so it will be available in any of the next published and soon, at some point, adopted guides. If anyone is a member of X12, if you have access to Glass, which is the new tool for being able to view the guides online, you'll be able to see the version of these guides, by the way. So if anyone's interested in that, you can reach out to X12 or myself, and we can certainly help you get that in place. This is really basically the claim or service adjustment information segment. The benefit and the reason we built it was because there was an original requirement from a state or two that said, you know, when you send a claim in and something gets rejected, I get the first reason. So this piece of information was bad. I fix it, I resubmit the claim, you send it back. Oh, well, I found out that something else was wrong. So then I get a rejection. I fix it, I send it back. It could be third and four and five, infinite number of times that there's bad data. So we designed this new segment that you can take a dollar amount, whether it be most likely the total dollar amount of the claim, and list all of the reasons that the payer is rejecting the claim. So the pieces of the new segment start with a dollar amount. There's a group code, and then you can report a reason code plus 5 remark codes, and then you can repeat that 15 times. So we kind of really max this out in saying, here's a dollar amount, and here's 15 reasons that we adjusted it, didn't pay or deny, whatever word is used. And then, by the way, here's additional remark code. And then there's also a spot for the quantity as well. So that's really what the new segment will provide for the industry.
And just to hit this point home, Pat, is there a limit to the number of reasons that can be included in this new RAZ segment?
So as I just said, you can report up to 15 CAQH, and within each of those CAQH, you can have 5 RARCs. Pretty extensive number.
Thanks, Pat. So next question here. On the 5010-835, is it legal to send an LQ segment with a RARC without sending a segment with a CARC?
Oh, that's a great question. So yes, there is the opportunity to report remark codes. There are a series of remark codes that begin with the word alert, and they are designed to be reported standalone. They are informational in purpose. You have a right to appeal, all kinds of other information, and they can be reported without a CARC. There are other RARCs that, based on the information, could also probably be reported without a CARC, but in general, it's not mandatory that they have to have both.
Just for clarity, we had another question come in, Pat. Is it the RAZ segment, the RAS segment? That's the new one, correct?
Yes, RAS is the new one, yes.
Yep, great for the clarification.
Sure.
Alrighty, so let's push ahead to our next FAQ section on CARCs and RARCs. So first question here is, who is ultimately responsible to ensure the correct version of CARC/RARC is on the 835? Is it the health plan or the provider?
So the originator of the 835 is responsible to make sure that they're reporting current active CARC codes. CARCs are activated, deactivated, updated 3 times a year. And so the 835, at the point it's published, is the codes are as good as their activation on the date the 835 is generated, basically. So it's the payer who originates the 835. It could be a clearinghouse or some other entity on behalf of a payer, but it's basically the originator of the 835.
Thanks, Pat. Next question is a good follow-up to this. It seems like providers spend a lot of time comparing original payer remittance advices to 835 files to really understand the payment. Why is that?
Well, there's a lot of reasons there, I think. It's up to and I'll continue to use the word originator of the 835 because again, it can be multiple entities depending on the relationships. But most payers have back-end systems, and those back-end systems are still using the traditional old EOB codes, explanation of benefit codes. And somewhere back when 5010 was originated and we mandated the use of CARCs and RARCs, there were cross-references created. If those cross-references aren't maintained and updated and done so in a way that the correct message is set on the 835, then there's always going to be this out of balance between the message and an EOB, which could be very, very detailed. I mean, it could have a state name, it could have all kinds of crazy details to it, whereas the CARCs tend to be a little bit more generic, and then you have to add a remark code, which could add that second level of specificity. So if that combinations and that mapping isn't maintained, then the 835 and the CARCs aren't going to ever provide the best message. So we've always recommended, payers originators have a process where 3 times a year, when the codes are updated, they take the time and they go through the EOB codes and they map them, and they make sure that they're still providing the best message. Additionally, that review might determine that there is no best CARC and or RARC to provide the message. And that's where the maintenance process comes into play. And I think we may have a question further down where we can talk about the process of submitting for a new code. And Bob, let me hand off to you a little bit to talk about the code combinations if you'd like. Oh, I think you're on mute, Bob.
Sorry, thanks.
There you go.
I can jump in here,
Okay.
give your throat a rest for a quick sec. We do have some information here on this slide that might help with this question too that we've had around the core code combinations. Not only do the CARCs and RARCs go through that period 3 times per year for review when they're published, they're adjusted, modified, new ones are added to those set lists. Core also has our set of code combinations that we maintain. So it's a separate process. But the code combinations together help give those messages that Pat was alluding to in her comments related to giving the most specific information to the provider about that reason for the adjustment or the denial. So you have that CARC, that claim adjustment reason code, plus the RARC, the remittance advice remark code, plus the group code, the CAGC code. So the combination of those 3 really provide the best, most definitive message to the provider, or that's the intent of it. So how do we make sure that that always happens? Well, we work through those new published lists 3 times per year. We look at our code combinations to see what the impact is. Are there new CARCs? Are there new RARCs? Should they be added to our 4 business scenarios? And you see those on the right side of your screen. So those 4 business scenarios, we generally make up, again, our approach is 80-20. This was 80% of the problems that providers have are around these 4 business scenarios when we developed these code combinations. So between these scenarios, it should handle many of the problems that providers originally told us about. These were the sticky points. These were where we're not getting the clearest message. So things around missing or invalid, incomplete documentation that was submitted with the bill or with the claim, missing invalid data on the claim. You sent in an electronic claim, but there's something missing or it's not clear. So the claim can't be adjudicated completely, or it can be and will be denied. So that message back to the provider has to be clear so they know to, when they rebill or make the adjustments for the bill, it can go back in and adjudicate more cleanly or actually pay. So that kind of approach is we go through that same process 3 times a year. We look at our code combinations, make adjustments to those, and then publish those new code combinations also 3 times per year. Definitely.
A quick question here, just a clarification question. Are the alert RARCs part of the code combination?
Oh, great question. And we do have a set of standing criteria that we developed originally. And that criteria, one of those criteria is to not include any alert RARCs in the core code combinations. Because I believe the intent, and Pat can weigh in here too, there are some specific uses and meanings behind those alert RARCs, and we didn't want to kind of clog up between the core code combinations between our CARC and our RARC and our group code. We want you to be able to use those alerts whenever you need to. So one of our criteria in the core code combinations is to not ever include them in our code combinations, because they could be used whenever a health plan needs them to be used. So they're not included for that specific reason, because they need to be used as much as possible.
Yeah, they really are meant to be more standalone. They're just messages, not necessarily related to a reason for adjustments. So that's why they're separate.
Yeah.
So, pardon. The next few questions are all code combinations related. There's some questions we've compiled over time. We've received them from multiple registrants and from different folks in the industry here. So we'll start off with this first one. We need a new CARC for a specific billing error. How can we request a new code? So
that can be done on the X12, oh my God, X12 website. And if you bear with me, and I think in 2 or 3 more questions, we have a slide. I'll be able to show you some screenshots of the website, so I can direct you right to the spot. But it's through the X12 website. Oh, well, there you go. If you want to do it now, sure. So this is the X12 website. It's x12.org. And you can see that I highlighted in the top here, it says references. So if you were to select that, and if you move to the next slide, I have a screen print of that. Okay, and so you can see that there's a listing here of the codes. I happen to highlight, for example, the claim adjustment reason code. But to the right of that, you'll see that there are some requests here to data maintenance, maintenance requests. These are all the X12 generated requests, but there should be a code request. And I apologize, it's kind of a small screen. One of them says code request, right? I think it's under maintenance request, actually. Okay, and then just to further, this is showing you how to view the claim adjustment reason code. For anyone who hasn't had a chance to see this, every code is listed with a description. If you're also looking for some of the other codes, for example, remark codes, you would click that bottom link, which I have highlighted. Daphne, if you could go to one more screen, please. Then you'd be able, this is where you now could look at every one of the code lists that X12 either supports or helps publish. Okay, one of which is remittance advice remark codes in addition to claims, but this is your claim status. This is everything. So by seeing that prior link for the maintenance request, you would be able to go in and actually request a new code. It asks you for what's the description, what's your business reason, and just that basic information.
Thanks, Pat. And on this subject of website and resources, can you share what is the new website to obtain the HIPAA implementation guides?
So it's actually through the Glass, which is an X12 product. I don't have a slide to show you that, but you would have to work with X12 to purchase licenses to be able to view those guides online now. There's no more PDFs, so everything is online. And this tool Glass, it does include the current 5010s, as well as give you access into the future versions. And if you have, if you're interested in that, like I said, we could direct you to contact me or just info@x12.org and tell them you're interested in talking to someone about that. Then they'll contact you and talk about it. I don't have any of the detailed information about cost or anything. That's not anything I do. So.
And maybe, Pat, I can just add that Glass, that tool, that application that's used, it is an online tool and allows for kind of a more contemporary way of publishing complex standards like that. Because if you remember, you pull up those big OGs or PDFs, 800-900 pages long. It's really a user nightmare to sort through a PDF like that or print it out. I started way back in the 1990s, and they were 500-600 pages. So this tool allows you to more easily find and search what you're exactly looking for by keywords, for example. You can go through and go directly to those segments and loops, really with the click of a button, right? It makes it much easier to find exactly what you're looking for, where you're looking for, and then you can actually cross-reference throughout different guides and things like that.
It does. It's great. It's so dynamic. You know, it's an online display, so it's very dynamic. It also includes things like a word book dictionary, and if you're really into the standards and building and developing the transactions for your companies, then, you know, it also gives you a lot more insight into, you know, what are those standards, what do they really look like, and why are they built. So there's a lot of great information there now, beyond just the PDF.
All right, a few more questions on Carks and Rocks before we move on to our next topic. So the next question here is, does my health plan organization have to support the core code combinations that are not applicable to our business needs?
Oh, great question. Applicability. We have defined those core code combinations around those 4 specific business scenarios. And there may be some health plans that don't have products or services that fall into, they would never adjudicate a claim that way. Would never need to highlight a reason for an adjustment because of one of those 4 business scenarios. So the 4 business scenarios don't apply, or one of them doesn't, or none. Then you wouldn't have to use them. You're not mandated to use those scenarios. Only if you adjudicate a claim in that CARC and ORC and group code, that combination together falls into one of those 3, would you be required to use them? We internally, and I think we've gotten X12 to adopt this kind of language too, we have, those are the industry mandated core business scenarios. Anything else we consider proprietary, that's proprietary to how that health plan adjudicates the claim. Those proprietary reasons or business scenarios stand outside of the core rules, so therefore they're proprietary. You can combine those CARCs and RARCs or group codes the best way you seem fit, and to make sure the provider has the message that they need on exactly why that was adjusted. There are definitely scenarios that fall outside of that. A big one that we've had, and some people have come to us to have this added, we have not done that yet, talking about our market business review, but we don't have a core code combination related to member submitted claims. There are lots of member submitted claims, right? Especially for services that are maybe atypical for medical, but are definitely part of other types of benefit structures that exist out there. So we don't have, there's not a core business scenario for member submitted claims. And a health plan may adjudicate those member submitted claims very differently than a provider submitted claim. I have to report those messages to a member or even to a provider, because it'd be a secondary claim, for example, that the provider submitted it first, the member submitted it secondly, and how does we notify the provider of that? There's ways of doing that, and health plans see those types of scenarios all the time. We don't address those, so those are outside the scope, those are proprietary.
Yeah, and Bob, let me just add, there's been some questions over time that says, well, there's a lot of CARCs that aren't in a scenario. Does that mean I can't use them? I think just to kind of add on top of you is all of the CARCs are free to be used. It's when that CARC and when your adjudication falls within the 4 scenarios, so I'd say non-billable or non-covered, that's when you need to go to the core combination and look at the codes and select the best combination. So there's been some false thoughts there about that. But all the CARCs are free to be used as you need them.
Exactly right.
So our next question is, what can we do with health plans we're not contracted with reporting their payment reduction under the CO45? And Bob, or Pat, I'm wondering if you can also speak to enforcement in general, because we are getting some audience questions around what that process looks like.
Okay, so this question, if you, a health plan is paying a non-contracted provider, and we have published some feedback that you should use group code PI, which is Paul Indian, PI. And then you would use potentially CARC 45 or whatever the associated CARC is. That will indicate back to the provider that the responsibility, it's not necessarily a contractual adjustment. PI kind of says you have to really kind of figure out where it goes. But because you're not contracted with me, I can't necessarily say I can't give you a CO as a group code. And that would be the best way to report those adjustments. Daphne, I'm sorry, I was missing the part about the second part of that question. I'm sorry.
We had an audience question, attendee question come in around the enforcement process if payers do not provide correct adjudication reasons. Can you provide any insight here?
Well, it's not really within X12's purview to necessarily help with that, unfortunately. I know there are some ways that, through this CMS and sort of higher levels up where you could report payers and kind of, say, hey, they're not being compliant. But I'm not really sure there's a great way. But go ahead, Bob. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, we definitely have some. You may or may not know that CAQH Core has a certification process. So many health plans have gone through that certification process. It's voluntary for the 835 transaction. And so if they have gone through that process and they are listed on our website that they have completed that particular certification, we can help moderate some of those questions that you might have about compliance or conformance with the operating rules. Because just going to pick an example, United might be adjusting a claim a certain way. You as a provider might receive that and disagree with the way that it was adjudicated, and that the messaging that you got back in that CARC, RARC, and group code combination, you anticipated it to look just like how the core code combination says it should look like. But you've got something different. Those expectations aren't exactly lining up. We can help moderate some of those discussions if you think there's an issue. Obviously, we would ask you to reach out to the health plan first. They will have provider representatives and provider EDI folks and the e-services team. There are probably all different kinds of titles out there for those types of groups within those health plans to help you. It's always best to check with them first, and any health plan on here can add a comment in here, give us your website or email address. That would always help our folks who are attending today. But we can help moderate some of those discussions that need to take place between health plans and providers when those messaging isn't exactly lining up. CMS also has a way to submit complaints through their assets process as well. CMS has a website where a provider can submit a complaint saying that, again, those expectations for what you consider HIPAA compliance is not exactly lining up with how the health plan may have set up their system for HIPAA compliance and generating those messages, again, those code combinations to come out to you and you receive them and have to do something with them. We know that there are probably tons and tons of examples. We've seen some of these between CARC 96 and CARC 45. There's kind of, it seems to be a, in fact, you may have seen these in the real world out there. Sometimes those seem to be the ones that come up the most for discussion. This CARC and this RARC, we always get it from this health plan, it works great, but we never get that same combination from this other health plan. We always have this. The core code combinations and even some of the tools that X12 have put together, we're trying to get the entire industry, every health plan, to think about claim adjudication in that same way, so that you will get the same code combinations for that exact same reason universally. From every health plan, we'll do it the same way, because it just makes it so much easier for a provider who may bill 15 different health plans a day, right, on average. If they're getting different code combinations and they all mean the same thing, really, but they're all different, it makes it harder for you, the provider, the person who's trying to post those bills automatically, and they all bump out, for you have to go work them, right? You have to work all the things that fall out and rebill and resubmit and check and see what this means for your accounts receivable. And all of that is all different. That's not really administrative efficiency. So the core code combinations are built around the need to bring all the health plans together to do it in a very similar way, so the provider is not negatively impacted by all the variances. But we know there's still work to do, and we plan on continuing to tackle that problem.
Yeah, and that's where I think, Bob, back to what I mentioned earlier about the job for the payer to map those EOB codes to the right combination. And if they're not doing a good enough job at that, then the messages aren't going to get on the 835. And I personally have worked with a lot of payers in some of my past jobs, and that's the root of this. You have to do a good job at doing that mapping. That's the bottom line.
And really, core participants, as well as folks that participate at X12, by sitting in those work groups, you will sit with your peers that are actually the ones doing the mapping at that health plan. So there's 15, 30 different representatives from health plans all talking about that same problem. And just by participating, you often can share ideas, and then it becomes more uniform throughout the industry. So that participation is really key to getting to a process where the industry coalesces around a common way of doing things. So that's our plug again for participation in CORE and X12. You really do get to hear conversations as they take place, can bring that information home and make those adjustments to your own systems, and really understand, again, what the challenges are, what the remediation is, and then how we can move forward together. I see here, Chelsea, I'm sorry, Daphne, I just saw come in from Chelsea. It says, how can we join the work groups? It's a great question. If you are in a CORE participating organization or an X12 participating organization, we can add you to those rosters, to those work groups here at CAQH, and Pat, we can facilitate you getting into those appropriate work groups on X12 as well. So let us know, send us an email. Contact information on the slides a little bit later, and we will get you plugged into the right groups.
Yeah, our work group 835 is always answering questions about CARCs and RARCs and mapping, and you know, people are constantly asking us those questions. So we're always happy to you know, reach out and answer, you know, the best we can. And we do have a lot of representation, you know, payers and clearinghouses and you know, all the payers as well as providers that are very vocal and will tell you, you know, what's the right answer. So, yeah.
Pat, we have a question here on whether or not there will be a new TR3 guide.
TR3 for the 835, that will be in the next, you know, mandated version. As I mentioned, if you get access to Glass, you'll be able to see all those versions now, in addition to your 5010. So we're working through versions 7030, 8010. I believe 8020 is actually even available. X12 is moving forward, generating a new version every year. I'm not going to speak about the mandate process because I can't. But the intent would be that as we move these things forward and we do get mandates and that process working, that versions will start moving on a more regular basis. That's really about all I can say right now because I just don't have any more, you know, detail about it.
Thanks, Pat. So now I will pass it on back to you to review the next couple of slides here.
Okay, so Bob has talked a lot about the core operating rule and the code combinations. And the value of, you know, based on the 4 scenarios here, here are the CARCs and RARC combinations along with group codes that should be used, I'll say must be used within those business scenarios. X12 has a slightly different approach and created something called the CARC-RARC TR2. TR2 is just a document type. It's an educational document type. We tend to call it the encyclopedia. So it contains every CARC, and within that CARC, additional information. So this is just a slide of what the main screen will look like, you know, listing CARCs. I mean, if you go to the second slide, I think I show a detail of what would come up. Okay, so if I were to pick CARC 4 and I wanted to understand more information about it, we have lots of parameters around that CARC now beyond, like again, sort of outside of what CORE has approached. Does worker comp this? Does auto industry use it? What are the group codes? Where if I needed to figure out, and I'm setting up my rules for when I use CARC4, is it related to a field on the claim? And then in addition, we also list all the remark codes. Now, the list of remark codes in this document are much more extensive because it's not necessarily based on that idea of a scenario. So the scenario is covered. We kind of say, you know, as an overall encyclopedia type resource, what are all the RARCs that could possibly use? Because again, they could be outside of that scenario. So this document was published a few years ago and was in a PDF form. We're working to update it, make sure it has everything current, and it will be available out on Glass. And it's so, you know, it's just a second resource that sort of gives you that extra flavor of where do I go? I have this message that I need to get mapped to CARC and RARC, and where do I start, and how do I even figure that out? And so this would just be another resource to help you with that. And we're hoping to have it released and published, I'll say by the end of the year. It's already almost November, so hopefully very soon. Okay.
Before we push ahead to our discussion around companion guides, are there any final comments or things you would like to address regarding resources? Okay.
Nope, I'm good.
All right, the next question is a mouthful, so get ready here. The Accelerated and Advanced Payment Program repayment process is started. This is a loan that providers received during COVID based on Medicare claim payment history. This adjustment will show in the PLB section of the remit. Do we know what the specific code will be?
Okay, so yeah, that is pretty specific. The 835 PLB segment is where you report provider level adjustments. And I think we've kind of thrown around some ideas that may actually be another great session to have to talk about the PLB because it has a lot of details. It's pretty powerful, but it also causes a huge amount of confusion to the industry in how the amounts and qualifiers and reference identifiers are reported. So we'll hold that thought and maybe consider that as another session. But to answer a question like this, there is no specific code today that is carved out that is for Accelerated Advanced Payment Program. So there are some generic codes like, I believe, CF, which is like adjustment. And that should most likely be the one used unless there's some other fit. And this really is a generic answer. So if you have some other kind of provider level payment that needs to be reported, this applies. So it really falls back on the payer once they make the decision on how they're going to report it and what adjustment code to use in the PLB is to publish a companion guide that will tell their provider base how they can expect to receive this information. And that's really the best way to make that communication. And Bob, I'll turn over to you. I know the Corps has some information about companion guides, but again, this is sort of just a generic answer to a very specific question.
Yeah, and it's great. We are getting some very, very specific questions, and we will try our best to answer them. Again, we're not a health PAT nor our health plan, so we can't necessarily address the answer in that particular way that a health plan would, especially some of these questions might be, hey, how does X Blue Cross plan do this? We might not know that answer. And we also might not know some other specifics around the payment process that plans have. We can let you know what we've heard, maybe, if it's safe to say, and we can what we think is the best approach or things that we've heard from our peers. We know that there are lots of questions around the PLB segment, and we agree that there probably could be an entire session just on that. We'll definitely take that feedback back with the rest of the organizations because we think it's a really powerful tool and really something the industry could use as additional education. Building on that too, there's lots of questions that we have that have come in around the No Surprises Act, the 835. Probably Right now, there's still so much debate and discussion around it. We haven't seen anything specific around a new CARC code or a specific work code that comes out that might adjust the core code combinations around it, or the TR2 document that Pat mentioned just a moment ago. We can probably all surmise there's going to be some impact to payments when it comes to the No Surprises Act. We will be a resource for the industry for those types of conversations, and we'll bring those back to this group and to our industry education components. Again, we'll work with X12 on that for any future session. So unfortunately, we probably can't answer any specific questions, but we can tell you there probably will be impacts to payments and how health plans will adjudicate claims related to those. You know, those messages will have to come in the 835 if they want these messages to be automated. So more to come for sure. Going back to the companion guide, it's also important that, you know, CAQH Core has published a companion guide template that we have issued for all of our transactions that we have operating rules for. So plans can use that template when they publish their own 835 companion guide so that everything looks the same. So you as a provider or you as a software vendor or clearinghouse can kind of be the reader, can consume those 835s in a very similar way because the data should be presented to you in the same way. As you can imagine, some health plans do things a little uniquely from one to the other. And so that information for that uniqueness of how they have implemented the 835, those types of segments or loops and messages that they need to share should be in their companion guide. So you can consume them and understand their unique implementation components that they have for the 835. Much of the companion guides that I've seen for 835s, and Pat, weigh in here too, you've seen probably even more than I have over the last years. They're often very similar, right? They're set up the same way. Those fields that have to be adjusted, or we're going to use it this way, they're all about the same. There's only a handful of them. Usually 835 companion guides aren't some monstrous long 400-page documents. It's usually 15, 20 pages, if that, and most of that's the agenda. In the legalese that the health plans put in, because right, the 835 is telling you how they're paying their claim, right? So it is related to payment, and payment's always a touchy issue when it comes to provider and health plan contracting. All that stuff's in the contract. The 835 is just telling you how they paid it, not why they paid it. So there's those kind of considerations too. Let's see, I know we've got lots of questions still coming in. And again, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the questions tab. We'll try to get to them before the end of the day.
So, Bob, I have a question here regarding the code combinations. So can payers use codes outside of the designated core code combinations?
Yeah, that one, yes. Folks can use, health plans can make up their own unique code combination as long as it doesn't fall within one of the core business scenarios. So it's one of those, if there's that proprietary scenario that a health plan has, or it's a scenario that's not covered by the big four, then the health plan can combine the CARC, WARC, and group code together for that message for the provider. So yeah, that falls into that proprietary messaging or business scenario. Again, if you're working at a health plan and you need to adjudicate claims, we call them business scenarios. So everything falls into a unique business scenario. So you as a health plan may have 20, 30 different scenarios on how you would message to the provider how you made that adjustment or denial on a claim. Well, core only addresses the first 4. There could be from 5 to 30 that are all proprietary. So you build out those health plan yourself and how you adjudicate those particular messages, well, adjudicate those claims and provide those messages to your providers. But those big 4 are covered by core. And so core and X12 and the core participants work together to make sure that that set of 4 business scenarios are robust, has everything you need. It covers every sub scenario, that's the word, every sub scenario within that business scenario. So everything is covered. You can't use a code combination outside of these 4 if it actually is one of these 4 scenarios, because this is it. This is everything you have is in these 4 business scenarios for each of those scenarios. Hopefully that was good.
You touched on this a little bit before as you were presenting. Have there been any additional business scenarios under consideration, and can you provide a little bit more color into what some of those discussions have looked like over the past few years?
Yeah, great. We do have a process that's called a market business review. It's where the market, you, the industry, come to CAQH Core and say, hey, we need you to develop a whole set of code combinations for a new scenario. We want to add scenario number 5 and 6 and 7. We do take this very seriously, and we have a consensus-based approach. So all of our participants get together, we look at what that suggestion is, we evaluate it, and we vote on it to see if we should add it or not. To date, we haven't added any since we initially published these a few years ago. That's because it's really hard to get consensus, right? We have to have every provider organization, every health plan organization, healthcare clerks and vendors really kind of come together and coalesce around a common definition of what that scenario is, how common it is, and make sure that the code combinations within that scenario all match up. We just haven't achieved that yet. I don't want to say that, but we've only had a couple of requests come in. The industry is really satisfied with the 4 that we have because it really does meet much of the problem. Some of the other scenarios that we had suggested, one of them, as I mentioned before, was that member-based claim submission. It's just not that common, I think, or it's very unique, and there might just be 1 or 2 code combinations that health plans use today. They already have it mapped out. It didn't seem to be a significant problem. So that doesn't mean that things don't change. So as the industry moves and develops new products, new services, enters new markets, looks at new regulation like the No Surprises Act, things may come up and percolate up, and that's why we have that market-based review. So as the industry changes, we can take that feedback in and make adjustments to not only the code combinations, but also the number of business scenarios we have.
To that end, we just got a question about potentially, have we ever considered increasing the frequency of these reviews?
Good question. I know that through time, we used to do this on an annual basis for the market-based review. And for I think 4 years in a row, we didn't have any submissions, or we had 1 submission for the market-based review. And that was just to add really a new ARC, RARC, and group code combination to an existing business scenario. So we scaled back to every other year for our market-based review. But our annual reviews, we do those 3 times a year, and they are based on, as Pat mentioned, the reviews that take place at X12 and by Medicare CMS when they update those CARC lists and those RARC lists. When those are updated, those 3 times per year, it fires off our process to update our core code combination. So 3 times seems to be the standard for the business review today for compliance-based reviews. But it's definitely something we can consider as we move forward if there's need to be adjustments.
So I don't want to rush anyone here. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say, if I believe stated in the rules that if you come up with a code combination and it falls within that business scenario, you can go ahead and start using it because you have to. And then there's an obligation to submit it to CORE and say, hey, I'm using this code. I strongly believe it belongs under scenario 3, and would you please consider adding it? So there is also that mechanism that kind of gives you, I don't want to say freedom, but it gives you a little leeway to go ahead and use the codes, because you don't want to jump, you don't want to, your providers need to get this message.
Right.
So I just want to add that too.
That's a good point, Pat. Right. The core code combinations are not set to limit use, right? Or not set to stifle messaging to providers. So we have that process, and we call it an emergency request process as well. So if you feel like perhaps your state legislature or a new federal regulation has come out, or your interpretation of a federal regulation it might be unique because it impacts a very specific market. And it might not be commercial, it might be Medicare Advantage, and only these health plans have Medicare Advantage, right? All those nuances that take place within our industry, and everyone has an excuse, right? There's always excuses. or exceptions to the process. We have an emergency process that Pat mentioned that, and we do get those. You can submit that in, we'll evaluate it and can add those in at any time, really. And we'll send out a notice when that happens. But we do have an entire emergency submission process. Not that it has to be emergency, but we have that process, that allowance. So it allows you to use the code, submit the request, and then we evaluate it. And when I say we, it's not CAQH core staff. It is the task group that of core participants that weigh in and evaluate that. It's not Bob. Bob doesn't vote on it. It would be folks like X12 and Humana and Cigna and Aetna and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas City, and those vendors and clearinghouses have to augment their systems too, right? They have to be able to accommodate those changes. So the core participants vote on those.
Thank you. So since we are coming up on the end of our hour, and I know we have a couple of slides, I'm going to close out the Q&A, but I have all of our contact info listed on the last slide in the presentation. So if you didn't have a chance to submit your question, you can always reach out to us after, and we'll be sure to answer you. I'm going to turn it back over to Pat for the next couple of slides.
Yeah, thank you. So if you're interested in an X12 member, you already are, your company is, and you're interested in getting more involved in 835, we're work group 3, and we're very active. Like I said earlier, we answer lots of questions. We participate in a lot of this outreach as we can. We're big into education. We have standing meetings that have been virtual, but hopefully maybe next year we'll start to meet. But all the interim meetings, usually I think they're 12. We just moved to a bi-monthly schedule. So if you're interested, you want to talk to your company about being a member, love to have you. The more people that we have, the better our exposure is. And somebody asked me a question, and I'm only as good as the people that respond, right, when we get an answer. So the more people we have joining those calls is amazing. So I would encourage you. I'm not talking about it, but knowing that, new versions will be coming up soon, may also be another reason to consider joining to get, to continue to build that information and knowledge base. Is there another slide? I don't, what comes after this? Oh, okay. Yeah, just to let you know that, we listen. There's a lot of activity going on beyond 835, and I can't speak for all the details, but for example, attachments, we're working closely with HL7 and the different organizations as the industry is moving forward. And so we listen and we participate as much as we can to stay active. And that includes things like in 835, if there's new payment methodologies, we need to understand them so that we can include them in the next guide so that they can be, part of the reporting. Okay, I think that's it for me. Yes, there you go.
Bob, do you want to take this? We have 2 minutes. Give us your best core pitch.
Yeah, just as Pat mentioned, the best way that we can work together is actually to work together. So core participants working and thinking and talking and addressing some of the biggest challenges, including payment and remittance advice, really can drive the industry to coalesce around a common solution. So we do that through our core participants. It's you guys on the phone. So we really appreciate your time this afternoon, and we would appreciate even more of your time if you join core and work in our work groups and our task groups and help us understand the challenges that you see every day, right? If you're trying to auto post that payment and you run into a problem and it's different between plan A and plan B, that's where core and X12 need to work together with the industry to get it to align more closely together. So come join us. We would appreciate your help.
And a minute to spare. Well, thank you both for letting us tap into your wealth of knowledge. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope to see you at our next Core and X12 webinar. As promised, our contact information is all on this slide right here. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out. We have an end of webinar survey where you could give us a little bit more feedback, any follow-up webinars that you'd like us to collaborate on. But thank you guys so much for joining.
Thank you for your time this afternoon, folks. Appreciate it.